Clara Finch stood at the gate of the custom house in a grey dress that had been mended twice, and a man in a good coat told her the counting room was no place for a clerk's girl. She did not argue. She had already read the seizure notice pinned to the door. She had seen, in one glance, the error in it. She only folded her worn gloves into her hand and walked down to the tide line, where the mud gave off its old smell of salt and rope. Behind her, the season was rotting. The Duke of Aldermere's whole shipment, 14,200 pounds of bonded tea and silk and indigo, sat under Crown seal at the quay, going nowhere. His 3 solicitors stood before 40 merchants at the exchange and shrugged, and Silas Thorne, the rival shipper, smiled his easy smile and said, "Let it forfeit. I'll buy the lot Thursday for a shilling on the pound." But down on the dock a boy was already running with a folded note. He carried it to the Duke's table and set it down. It said there was a girl on Prince Street who could read the clause the gentleman could not. If you've ever been judged by your dress instead of your heart, this story is for you. If it moves you, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the quiet before any of it began. Prince Street was a narrow lane of shopfronts, 3 lanes back from the water. You could smell the harbour from it, but you could not see the harbour from it, and that suited the people who worked there. Halfway down stood the chandlery of Mr. Pettifer, ship's supplier, and in the back room of that chandlery, at a high desk under a small window, Clara Finch kept the books. She was 23. She had a plain, steady face that people forgot the moment they turned away, and hands that were never quite clean of ink. She had kept Mr. Pettifer's ledgers for 6 years, and in 6 years she had never once let a column go wrong. The chandler knew it. He paid her less than he would have paid a man, and he told himself the difference was fair because she was quiet, and quiet women, he believed, did not need much. She did not need much. That was true. She needed a chair, a lamp, a nib, and to be left alone with the figures, and she was content in a way that would have surprised the men who pitied her. There was more work than the chandlery, though. In the evenings, when the shop was shut, Clara copied entries for the bonded warehouses along the quay. The clerks there were slow, and their hands were bad, and the merchants wanted clean, fair copies of what had gone in and come out. A shilling a page. She would sit under her lamp and copy the movements of tea and hemp and Spanish wine, chests and bales and puncheons, and she would know, without being told, exactly what the king's duty on each of them ought to be. She could not have said how she knew. She had simply grown up knowing. That was the part nobody saw. To the street she was Pettifer's girl with the ink on her fingers. In her own head she was something else entirely, and she had learned long ago to keep the two apart. On the shelf above her narrow bed, where another woman might have kept a Bible or a keepsake box, Clara kept a book. It was a customs tariff, a working man's copy, the leather soft and dark from handling. It was not hers. It had been her father's. Every margin of it was crowded with pencil, small and slanted and sure. A note here on how a schedule had changed, a note there on where the wording tripped a man up, a little arrow drawn to link one clause to another, the way only a man who used the book daily would think to link them. Thomas Finch had been a customs clerk. A good one. Better than good, he had been the sort who read the whole schedule when other men read the first line and guessed. And then one winter, when Clara was a girl, he had come home without his post. There had been a manifest with his name against it, and an entry on that manifest that was wrong, and though he swore to the end that the hand was not his. The office did not care whose hand it was. It was his name. A clerk was his name, and nothing more. They put him out the door, and they gave him no character, and he never worked again, not properly, and he died some years after, with the disgrace still hung on him like a wet coat. Clara did not think on it. She would tell you so herself plainly if you asked. He was let go over a manifest he never signed, she would say, in the same voice she used for the price of tallow. I never think on it now. And then she would turn the page and go on copying, and the tariff book would sit on its shelf, and that was where it stayed. She was wrong about not thinking on it, but she believed it, and that is a different thing. The trouble at the quay began on a Tuesday, and Clara knew of it the way she knew of most things, sideways through the copying. A cargo had been stopped, not held for inspection, which was common, but seized. The word went along the warehouse row and reached her in the evening when a runner brought her a bundle of entries to fair copy for the next day. She read them by lamplight the way she read everything, quickly and completely, and near the bottom of the third sheet she came to the entry for a shipment landed under the Aldermere name, and she stopped. She read it again. The goods had come in under one schedule, the duty had been assessed under another. The two did not match, and because they did not match, the officer of the port had done what the law told him to do with goods whose paper was in disorder. He had seized them and pinned the notice and set the matter down for the quarterly court. And the quarterly court, when Clara found the date, was 19 days off. 19 days. She sat with that. She knew what a seizure cost a day. In demurrage, in a berth held, and a warehouse rented, and a crown that did not hurry. £40 a day, if she had the rate right, and she had the rate right. £40 a day, mounting, and at the end of it a court that could take the whole cargo for the king and sell it off, and the merchant left with nothing but the bill for keeping it while they ruined him. £14,200, the entry said. She had never, in her life, held more than a few shillings at once. She looked at the number as at a thing behind glass, and then, because she could not help it, because it was the way her mind was made, she looked at the discrepancy again, and she saw that it was not a large one. It was a matter of which schedule the goods had been entered under. It was the kind of snarl a clerk could make in a hurry, and a better clerk could untangle in an hour. She could almost see the loose thread of it. She reached for it in her head, the way you reach for a name you half remember, and then she folded the sheet and set it on the pile to be copied clean and put out the lamp. It was not her cargo. It was not her business. Dukes had solicitors for such things, 3 of them, she had heard, and they were paid more in a week than she was paid in a year, and they would find the thread or they would not, and either way no one had asked Clara Finch. She went up to her narrow bed. The tariff book sat on its shelf in the dark. She did not take it down. The Duke of Aldermere did have 3 solicitors, and they did not find the thread. Sebastian Vane was 32, and he had come into his title the way men came into titles they could not afford. Suddenly, and too young, and to a house that looked from the road like wealth, and looked from the study like a slow drowning. His father had left him a name that opened every door in Bristol, and a set of accounts that could not pay to keep the doors on their hinges. The season's cargo was to have set it right. One good season. The tea alone would have cleared the worst of it. He had staked the year on that hull, and the hull was under seal, and every morning it stayed under seal was £40 he did not have, laid on top of debts he already could not pay. He was proud. He knew he was proud. It was the one flaw he could see in himself clearly, and knowing it did not help him mend it. He had been raised to believe that a Vane asked a question, and the world answered, and the world had all his life until now. Now he asked, and the answer was a shrug in a good coat. His solicitors read the seizure paper and shook their heads and used long words that meant they did not understand it. The port officer was polite and immovable. The other merchants looked at him across the exchange with the particular sympathy men give to a rich man about to stop being rich, which is no sympathy at all, only interest, and Silas Thorne smiled at him. Thorne was everything Sebastian was not, and had made himself so on purpose. No title, no blood, no house on the hill, only ships, more of them every year, and a firm, thorn and marrow that had grown from nothing into a thing that could swallow a duke's season for a shilling on the pound and call it Thursday's work. He wore his success where a gentleman would have hidden it. And when he said, before 40 men, that he would buy the Aldermere cargo at auction once it forfeited, he said it looking straight at Sebastian, and he was still smiling. Sebastian went home that night and stood in the study among his father's debts and understood that he was going to lose. He was a proud man watching the ground open, and pride is no use at all against an open ground. It only makes the falling worse. Which was when his man brought in a boy, and the boy brought in a note. Sebastian read it twice, as Clara had read the entry twice. There is a girl on Prince Street, it said, who reads the clause your gentleman cannot. Ask at the chandler's, Pettifer, back of the shop. He nearly threw it in the fire. A girl. At a chandler's. It was absurd. It was the kind of thing a drowning man is offered and knows to refuse. His solicitors were the best in the city, and if the best in the city could not read the paper, then the paper could not be read, and no shop girl was going to do what learned men could not. He held it over the grate. But £40 a day is a loud sound in a quiet room, and 19 days is not many. And a proud man who is about to lose everything will do one absurd thing before he will do nothing. He put the note in his pocket. In the morning, before he could think better of it, he called for his hat and did not tell his man where he was going, because he could not have said it aloud without hearing how it sounded. The Duke of Aldermere went to Prince Street on foot. The bell over Pettifer's door was a cheap one, and it rattled rather than rang. Clara heard it from the back and did not look up, because the bell was Mr. Pettifer's business, not hers, and she had a column half down the page. She heard the chandler come bustling from wherever he had been, and she heard his voice change, heard it climb and soften and start to fawn. And that was unusual enough that she lifted her head. Through the doorway to the shop she could see a coat. Not a good coat of the Prince Street kind. A coat from another city, another life, the wool of it so fine it seemed to drink the poor light of the shop and give nothing back. Above the coat a face she did not know, a young man's face gone tired around the eyes, looking about the chandlery as though he had walked into the wrong century. Any assistance, your grace. Any assistance in my power, Mr. Pettifer was saying, and Clara understood the two words your grace the way you understand a stone dropped in still water. The ripple of them reached her before she had thought. The tired young face was not looking at Mr. Pettifer, it was looking past him, into the back room, at the girl at the high desk with ink on her fingers. I was told, said the Duke of Aldermere, and stopped, because he plainly did not know how to finish a sentence that began with him being told anything by a note from a dock boy. I was told there is someone here. Who keeps the books? That is my clerk, your grace, but she is only, I should like to speak with your clerk. Clara set down her nib. She wiped her fingers on the cloth she kept for the purpose, out of habit, though it did no good. She came out from behind the desk and into the shop, and she stood in her twice-mended grey dress in front of a duke, and she was not frightened, which surprised her a little. She was too curious to be frightened. She wanted to know what a man like that could possibly want in a shop like this. He took the seizure notice from inside his coat, a copy of it, the same words she had read at the custom-house gate and again by lamplight, and he held it out to her without quite meaning to. The way you hand a thing to the one person in the room who might understand it. They tell me this cannot be undone, he said. My solicitors. The port. Every man I ask. His jaw was tight. It cost him to be here. She could see exactly what it cost. I am told there is nothing in the law that will move it before the court takes it. I have come to ask whether that is true. Clara took the paper. She did not need to. She remembered every line of it. But she took it, and she looked at it, and she gave him the courtesy of looking, because a man who has come this far to ask deserves to see you ask it too. Then she said, "It is not true." The shop went very quiet. Miss Pettifer, hovering, made a small sound. The goods were landed under one schedule, Clara said. The duty was set under another. That is the whole of it. The officer had no choice but to seize, because the two papers disagree, and where the papers disagree the goods are held. But they disagree because someone entered them wrong, not because the duty is wrong. Correct the entry and the disagreement is gone, and where there is no disagreement there is no ground to hold. The Duke stared at her. My solicitors said the schedules were the difficulty. Your solicitors are right that the schedules are the difficulty, said Clara. They are wrong that the difficulty cannot be answered. There is a provision for goods entered under the wrong schedule and re-entered within the bonded window. If the correction is made and the re-entry falls inside the window, the seizure does not stand. It is not a famous clause. Men who read the schedule for a living forget it, because it is written for clerks, and clerks are not the men who argue before courts. She held the paper back out to him. He did not take it. He was looking at her as though she had spoken in a language he had been told all his life was gibberish, and had just this moment turned out to be his own. You saw that, he said slowly, just now. Reading it once. I saw it 4 nights ago, Clara said, copying the warehouse entries. It is not my cargo, so I said nothing. No one had asked me. There was a chair by the shop counter, a plain rush-bottomed thing that Mr. Pettifer sat on to do his own poor sums. The Duke, without seeming to know he did it, drew it out and turned it toward her. Sit, he said. Please, if you would tell me the whole of it, I would. Sit and tell me. Clara looked at the chair. It was a small thing, a courtesy, the kind of small thing that men in fine coats did not do for women in grey dresses, and she understood in that moment that he had done it without calculation, which was rarer still. Something in her wanted to sit. She was tired, she was always tired. It had been a long time since anyone had drawn out a chair for her and said please. She stayed standing. I will tell you the whole of it, she said. But I will need the entries, the real ones, not the copies. And I will need to see how the window falls to the day, because if you have already run past it, no clause in England will help you. She folded her hands in front of her apron. How many days to the court? 19, said the Duke of Aldermere, and the number, in his mouth, sounded like a man counting his own breaths. Then we have not run past it yet, said Clara. But we will, if your gentlemen keep reading the first line and guessing at the rest. Bring me the entries. She had said we. She heard herself say it. She had not meant to. The word had come out of the part of her that had never stopped reaching for a loose thread, the part her father had made and then left behind on a shelf. She saw the Duke hear it too. Something eased at the corner of his tired eyes, not a smile, but the first loosening of the thing that had been pulled tight in him since the seal went on his hull. I will bring them tonight, he said. He brought them that night and the next, and on the second night Clara Finch proved she was right. And the proving of it took place by lamplight at the high desk in the back of a chandler's shop, with a Duke standing at her shoulder because there was nowhere for a Duke to sit that was not the rush-bottomed chair, and he would not take the chair while she stood. The entries came in a leather case, the port's own copies, obtained by the one thing Sebastian had left that still worked. His name, which could still open the warehouse door even when it could no longer pay the warehouse. Clara spread them under the lamp and went into them the way she went into everything. All at once and to the bottom. He watched her do it and did not understand what he was watching, only that it was fast and certain, and that her lips moved a little over the figures the way a musician's fingers move when there is no instrument. Here, she said, after a long while, and set one finger on a line. The tea was entered here, on landing, under the schedule for goods for immediate release. But it was never released. It went straight to bond, you can see it. Here, the warehouse mark, 3 days on. Goods that go to bond should have been entered under the warehousing schedule from the first. They were not. That is the error. That is the whole seizure. this one line, this wrong schedule at the top. An honest mistake, said Sebastian. A clerk in a hurry. Clara did not answer at once. She was looking at the line, and there was something in her face he could not read. A small stilling, quickly gone. Perhaps, she said. It does not matter for our purpose. Honest or not, it is wrong, and wrong entries can be re-entered. Look, she drew a fresh sheet toward her and began to write, quick and neat, the figures falling into their columns like water finding its level. Re-enter the goods under the warehousing schedule. The duty comes to the same in the end. The Crown loses nothing, which is what the Crown cares about. And the re-entry falls. Her pencil ran down a little calendar she had drawn in the margin. On the 11th day. The bonded window closes on the 14th. We are inside it. By 3 days. She sat back. It was the first time she had let herself lean back all evening. By 3 days, she said again, quietly, as much to herself as to him. If it had come to me a week later, there would have been nothing to do. The window would have shut, and the court would have taken it, and no clerk on earth could have opened it again. 3 days, Your Grace. That is all the margin you have. That is all the margin anyone ever has, and most men never learn how little it is. Sebastian looked at the sheet. He looked at the calendar in the margin, the little marks of a hand that had done this 1,000 times for a shilling a page. He thought of his 3 solicitors, and the fees he had paid them, and the long words that had meant nothing. Why could they not see this? He said. It was not quite a question. Learned men, the best in the city. Because the law was written by clerks, Your Grace. Clara set down her pencil. She said it without heat, as a fact of the world, the way she might have told him the tide. That is why none of you can read it. Your gentlemen learn the grand parts, the parts that are argued and remembered. But the seizure of a cargo does not turn on the grand parts. It turns on a clerk in a warehouse writing the right word at the top of a page, or the wrong one. The men who wrote the schedule knew that. They were clerks themselves. They wrote it for men like She stopped. For men like the ones who use it, not for dukes. She had nearly said something and turned it aside. He saw that too, and had the sense not to reach for it. He was quiet a moment. Then he did something that surprised them both. He took off nothing, said nothing formal, made no speech. He simply drew the rush-bottomed chair around at last, and this time he sat in it himself, across the desk from her, so that they were level, a duke and a clerk's daughter at the same low table, and he said, "Show me." All of it, from the beginning. I want to be able to say it myself, if I must, before the court. Teach me to read my own paper. And Clara Finch, who had spent her whole life being looked past, found herself looking at a man who was asking to be taught, and found that she did not quite know where to put the feeling that came with it. So she did what she always did with feelings she could not place. She turned back to the page. "From the beginning, then," she said. "This mark, here, at the top. This is where it all begins. Watch, the board of the Custom House met 4 days later, and the Duke of Aldermere brought Clara Finch into the room. She had known it would be like this, and it was worse than she had known. It was a long room, panelled dark, and down the length of it sat the gentlemen of the board and the men of the port and the solicitors, all in frock coats, all in that quiet uniform of men who have never once been told the counting room is no place for them. And in among them, at his ease against the wall where he had no business being, except that men like him were always somehow there, stood Silas Thorne. When Clara came in behind the Duke, in her grey dress with her father's tariff book under her arm, the room did what rooms did. It looked at the dress. She felt the look land on her the way you feel cold water. It went along the table, gentleman to gentleman, a small tightening of mouths, an exchange of glances, and here and there a sound that was almost but not quite a laugh. A woman, a shop girl plainly, by the cut of her, come to instruct the board on the law. The Duke felt her hesitate half a step behind him. He did not look back at her, but he slowed so that she could come level with him rather than trail him, and he walked her the length of that room to the foot of the table as though she were a gentleman's daughter and not a chandler's clerk. It cost him something to do it. In that company. She knew it cost him. She would remember that he did it anyway. "Your Grace," said the chairman, a heavy man with a heavy watch chain, and there was in the two words a whole sentence unspoken, which was, "What have you brought us?" "I have brought the person who has read the seizure," said Sebastian, "and who will explain to the board why it cannot stand." The almost laugh went round the table again, freer this time. One of the solicitors, his own, Clara thought, one of the three, looked at the ceiling. "Your Grace," the chairman said again, more gently, the way one speaks to a man who has embarrassed himself and does not yet know it. "This is a matter of some complexity. The schedules, said Clara Finch, are exactly the matter." She had not meant to speak first, but she had learned, at the high desk, that if you wait to be given the floor by men who have decided not to give it, you will wait until the court takes the cargo. So she spoke, into the panelled quiet, in the plain even voice she used for the price of tallow, and the sound of a woman's voice in that room was so unexpected that the almost laugh died of surprise. And for one moment, one single moment, they listened only because they had not thought to stop her yet. She used the moment. She had learned that too. The goods were entered on landing under the schedule for immediate release, she said. They went to bond 3 days on. Goods that go to bond must be entered under the warehousing schedule. They were not. That is the disagreement the officer seized upon, and he was right to seize, because the papers disagree. But the disagreement is an error of entry, not of duty. Re-enter the goods correctly, and the papers agree, and where the papers agree there is no ground to hold. The provision is in the warehousing schedule, third part, under re-entry within the bonded window. The window closes on the 14th day. The re-entry can be made on the 11th. You are being asked to forfeit £14,000 of a merchant's goods over a clerk's word written wrong at the top of a page, when the law itself provides the remedy, 3 days inside the door. She stopped. The room was not laughing now. The chairman's heavy face had gone still. Down the table, one of the portmen had leaned forward and was frowning, not at her, at the paper in front of him, turning it, looking for the thing she had named. A solicitor was riffling fast through a bound copy of the schedule, and Clara watched his thumb slow and stop, and she knew he had found the third part, and she knew by his face that it said exactly what she had said it said. "That clause," the chairman began, "it is not commonly read." Clara agreed. "It was written for clerks, that is why it was not read." And she laid her father's tariff book on the end of the long table and opened it to the page where a small slanted pencil hand had underlined the third part of the warehousing schedule years before she was ever born into a position to need it, and had drawn a little arrow in the margin to the re-entry provision, linking the two the way only a man who used the book daily would think to link them. The nearest gentleman looked down at the worn book, at the crowded margins, at the confident dead hand, and something crossed his face that was not scorn. She had held the room, not because they had decided to respect her, they had decided nothing of the kind, but because she was right, and being right, in a room full of men whose whole trade was being right, is a thing that cannot be laughed away once it has been said plainly enough. Against the wall, Silas Thorne had not moved, he had not frowned, had not leaned forward, had not gone hunting through the schedule like the honest men at the table. He stood with his arms folded and watched Clara Finch with an expression she could not read from where she stood, and it was only later, turning it over in the dark, that she would understand it had not been surprise. Every other man in that room had been surprised. Thorne had not. He had looked, if anything, like a man watching a door he had thought long locked begin, very slowly, to open. But she did not know that yet. She knew only that the chairman had called for the entries to be brought and checked, and that the almost laugh had not come back, and that when the board rose to confer among themselves in low voices at the far end of the room, the Duke of Aldermere turned to her in his fine coat, in front of all of them, and said, low, so that only she could hear, "You held them." "I was right," said Clara. "That is different from holding them. They will check it now, and it will be true. And they will hate that it was true, and that a grey dress said it first. Do not mistake their silence for a decision, Your Grace. We have 3 days. We have not won anything yet." "No," Sebastian said, and there was something in his tired eyes now that had not been there in the chandler's shop, something that was looking at her and not at the paper. "But you have made them stop laughing. In that room. I have watched that room laugh at better men than me and never stop." He glanced down the table to where the board conferred, to where Thorn stood easy against the wall, and back to her. "Who taught you to read the law like that?" Clara's hand rested on the worn cover of the tariff book. For a moment she did not answer. The pencil hand in the margins seemed to look up at her from the open page. "A clerk," she said at last, "a long time ago." And down the table, unnoticed by everyone but her, Silas Thorn unfolded his arms and pushed off from the wall and began, without hurry, to make his way toward the chairman, and Clara felt the first cold breath of something she could not yet name, the sense that the room she had just won was about to change beneath her feet, and that the man who had never once looked surprised knew exactly why. Thorn reached the chairman before the entries did. Clara watched him lean and speak. She could not hear the words. She did not need to. She had spent 6 years reading faces across a chandler's counter, and this one she knew. It was the face of a man laying down a card he had held a long while. The chairman's head came up. He looked not at Thorn, but at her, and the look was not the earlier scorn. It was something colder. It was the look a man gives a thing that has become a problem. "They have asked something of him," she said, low. "What?" Sebastian followed her eyes. "I do not know yet. But we have 3 days, and he has just bought himself one of them." She was right about that, too. The board did not rule that afternoon. The chairman rose and said the schedule would be consulted, the entries checked against the warehousing provision, and the matter held over. 3 days. He said it as though he were granting mercy. Thorn stood by the wall again with his arms folded, and he did not look at her once as she left, and that was worse than if he had. She walked home along the tide line in the failing light. The river ran brown and slow past the moored hulls. Somewhere out in the roads the Duke's ship sat under Crown Seal, with £14,200 rotting in her hold, £40 a day bleeding off her, while men in warm rooms consulted schedules. Clara did the sum without wanting to. 19 days had been the count at the start. It was down to 11 now before the court sat, and she had a cold certainty, walking, that the paper alone would not be enough, that a checked entry and a true clause would meet, in that room, something that did not care whether it was true. She needed to see the manifest. The real one, the ship's own. That was the thing no clerk's copy could give her. She went at dawn. She told no one, because there was no one who would have let her. A woman, alone, unchaperoned, going aboard a sealed Crown vessel, in the grey before sunrise, it was every kind of ruin at once. The watchman at the head of the gangway was half asleep and wholly bored, and she had a letter in the Duke's hand, and a manner she had learned from 6 years of men who thought a quiet voice meant a soft one. He let her by. She did not run. She never ran. She walked up the gangway with her ledger under her arm as though she had been sent, and in a way she had. The hold smelled of tea and tar and river damp. Grey light came down through the hatch in a single dusty column. The chests sat in their rows under the seal, exactly the fortune the notice said they were, and she found the mate's berth, and the small locked box, and the ship's papers inside it that the customs men had copied and never truly read. She read them by the column of light, and there it was. The T had been entered under the wrong part of the warehousing schedule that she already knew. That was the error the whole case turned on. But the copies the board held were fair copies, clean, a clerk's neat hand. The original was not neat. The original had been altered. She saw it the way she saw everything, all at once and then all at proof. The schedule number had been written and scraped and written again. Under the changed figure the old one still ghosted through if you tilted the page to the light. And she tilted it. And there it was, the correct number, the one that would have kept the cargo clean, struck out and replaced with the wrong one. Not an error. A hand had done this. A hand had made the mistake on purpose. She sat back on her heels in the cold hold and felt the whole shape of it turn over. Somebody had wanted this cargo seized. She took the entry to the light and looked at the initials in the corner. Small, a clerk's mark. The sort of thing no gentleman ever reads. And she went very still. Because she knew that scrawl. She had grown up under it. It was in the margin of every page of the worn tariff book that sat on the shelf above her narrow bed. And it was not her father's. It was made to look like her father's. Close, careful, the long tail on the F, the way the T crossed low. Whoever had done this had studied Thomas Finch's hand and copied it, the way a man copies a hand he means to hang something on. She knelt there a long time. Outside a gull cried, and the tide began to turn against the hull, and the light in the hatch changed from grey to a thin gold. She thought of her father coming home the night they let him go, 6 years dead now, and how he had sat at the kitchen table with the manifest they said he had signed, and turned it over and over, and said, "I never wrote that number, Clara. I never in my life wrote that number," and no one had believed him, because he was a clerk, and clerks do not argue with the men who keep them. He had been telling the truth. She had believed him, and it had not mattered that she believed him. It mattered now. She copied the ghosted figure and the false one both in her own careful hand, with the light and the tilt noted so any man could find it who was willing to look. She put the box back as she had found it. She went down the gangway past the watchman with her ledger under her arm and her face like a shut door, and she did not let it break until she was 3 streets off, and then she stood in a doorway on Prince Street and shook for a while, and then she stopped. Because there was work. She did not tell the Duke that first day. She wanted to be sure. She read the copied hand against her father's real hand 100 times by the tariff book's own margins. She read the schedule number against the entries, and the more she read, the surer she grew, and the sicker, because the whole thing was one thing, and had been one thing all along. The same forgery that had trapped the Duke's cargo had ruined her father. The same hand. She took it to Pettifer's back room, where the Duke had come those 2 nights running with his leather case of port entries, and she laid it out for him by lamplight. And he read it, and she watched the moment it reached him. "This is not an error," Sebastian said slowly. "No. Someone altered the entry so that my cargo would fall under the wrong schedule, so that it would be seized." He looked up. "Who profits from my ruin?" "Thorne buys the lot at auction for $1 on the pound." "Thorne takes my roots." His jaw set. "This is Thorne." "Yes, then we have him." He stood, quick, the tiredness gone. "We take this to the court. A forged Crown entry, that is not a schedule dispute, Clara, that is a hanging matter. We do not merely save the cargo, we finish him. Look at the initials," she said. He looked. He did not understand them. Why would he? They were a clerk's mark, the sort of thing no gentleman reads. "They are made to look like a customs clerk's," she said. Her voice was very level. She had practiced being level all the way from the ship. A clerk who worked the Bristol books, a clerk who was dismissed 6 years ago over a manifest he swore he never signed, turned out of his place. Named a thief before the whole port. died 3 years after, with the disgrace still on him. The room was quiet. His name was Thomas Finch, she said. He was my father. She watched it land. She watched the Duke of Aldermere understand, at last, all at once, that the fraud strangling his fortune and the fraud that had broken the girl standing in front of him were not two things. They were one. That Thorn had built this trap once before, years ago, and used a good clerk to spring it, and had simply built it again, and that clearing the Duke's cargo now meant dragging Thomas Finch's disgrace back into open court, in front of the whole port that had believed it. "Clara," he said. And that was all. He did not have anything to put after her name. "So you see," she said, "it is not so simple as finishing him. To free your cargo I must reopen the worst day of my father's life in public, and swear that the mark on this entry, my father's mark, is a forgery, when a decade of men in this city have called it his and been satisfied. A clerk's daughter standing up in the customs court to say the record is wrong and she alone can read it right." Her mouth twisted, not quite a smile. "You know how that room laughs, Your Grace. You told me so yourself." He came around the table. He was very close, closer than a duke should stand to a chandler's clerk, and neither of them stepped back, and that was the 7th small thing, or near it, the one she would not let herself count. "Then we do not do it," he said. "There is another way. There is always another way. Let the cargo forfeit. I will find the money elsewhere. I will, you will not. It is your whole season. Without it the estate goes, and you know it goes." She shook her head. "You do not get to be ruined to spare my feelings. That is not nobility, that is waste. I am not offering to be ruined to spare your feelings." He said it low and steady, and it was the first time he had ever said anything to her that was only true, with no rank in it and no bargain. "I am offering not to buy my fortune with your father's grave. There is a difference. You taught me the difference 3 days ago. You said being right is not the same as holding the field." He looked at her. "I will not hold this field if the ground is your father." And that undid her more than scorn ever could have, and she could not have that, not yet. So she gathered the papers and squared them and stood. "Sleep on it," she said. "The court sits in 11 days. We have time to be foolish tomorrow. Tonight I am tired." She did not sleep. Thorn moved first, of course. He always moved first. That was the thing about a man who had built the same trap twice. He knew where the door was. The auction was set. The demurrage doubled, £40 a day, now bleeding to 80. The notice went up on the custom house gate beside the seizure paper, and Clara read it walking to work in a river fog, so thick the mastheads were gone. The clock had been 11 days. Then it was 3. Then, the morning the forfeiture court sat, it was 1. And in the court Thorn did not wait to be accused. He accused her. It was a fine cold room, with a high bench and 40 merchants on the benches below. The same men who had been at the exchange, the same men who had shrugged, and the Duke's 3 solicitors in their black, and Thorn standing easy with his firm's colours in his coat. And when the matter of the entry was raised, when the Duke's man rose to speak of a re-entry provision and a schedule error, Thorn rose over him, smooth, sorrowful, and turned the whole room with 6 sentences. "Before the board wastes its morning," he said, "let it know who authored this remarkable reading of the law. Not His Grace's solicitors. A clerk. A woman. A chandler's book girl off Prince Street who was seen, I have a watchman's word, going aboard the sealed vessel at dawn, alone, unlawfully, and handling the Crown's own papers with her own hands." He let it sit. The room stirred. "Gentlemen, the manifest has been tampered with. On that we agree. The only question is by whom. And I put it to this court that a custom house does not overturn a lawful seizure on the say-so of a clerk's daughter who was caught breaking the seal, a girl, I am sorry to say it, whose own father was turned out of this very service for falsifying a manifest. It runs in the blood, does it not? She has told His Grace a pretty story. She has told it well. But she is the one who was found aboard that ship. And the room did what the room did. It did not laugh this time. It murmured. The murmur was worse. Clara stood at the side in her twice-mended grey dress and felt every eye come to her and weigh her and set her down on the wrong side of the scale, and she understood, with a clean and terrible clarity, exactly what Thorn had done. He had not hidden the forgery. He had let it be found, because he had made sure that whoever found it would be the one person in Bristol who could not be believed. He had known about her. He had known who her father was. He had never once looked surprised because he had planned from the very start for a Finch to be standing in this room and to be laughed out of it. She saw the Duke half rise, furious, ready to spend his rank on her defence in front of all of them. And she saw, at the back of the room, the Dowager Duchess. She had not known Lady Aldermere would come. But there she was, straight-backed in grey silk, far finer than Clara's grey, watching her son, watching the girl her son was about to ruin himself for. And when the recess was called, when the bench withdrew to consider whether the seizure would stand, the Dowager crossed the cold flags to Clara, and stood before her, and spoke very quietly, so that it was only between the two of them, two women in grey. "You have read a great deal of law," the Dowager said. "Read this. My son is not ruined by a lost cargo. Men recover from lost cargoes. He is ruined by scandal. A duke who stands up in a crown court and stakes his name on a dockside girl caught breaking a seal, a girl whose father was a disgraced clerk, that duke does not recover. That is not money. That is the thing money is built on, and it does not come back. She was not cruel. That was the worst of it. She was only certain, the way the tide is certain. If you have any care for him at all, not the pretty kind, the useful kind, you will not let him spend it on you in this room. You will step back. You will let the safe path be taken. He can marry money and mend the estate a slower way and be a duke in 10 years still. Or he can have you, and be nothing, and take you down with him when he goes. Choose which of those is love, Miss Finch. You seem a clever girl. Choose the one that costs you, and not him." And Clara, who had a true thing in her hand and a father's name to clear and 11 days' work behind her, stood in the cold court and knew the old woman was not wrong. That was the trap. Thorn had built the outer one, but this one Clara had built herself, out of caring, and there was no clause for it. She looked past the Dowager to Sebastian, who was watching them both across the room with his heart in his tired face, ready to burn everything down for her the moment she gave the word. So she did not give the word. She went to him before the bench returned. She was very calm. She had learned calm at a counter. "Do not stand up for me in there," she said. "Clara, listen. If you stake your name on me now, Thorn wins twice. He keeps your cargo and he ruins your house, and my father is still a thief in the ledger, and I am the girl who dragged a duke into the mud. That is the story that will be told. I have read that room. That is the only story it will take today." She pressed the copied entry into his solicitor's hands, not his solicitor's. So it would be the law speaking and not a besotted duke. The proof is real. It will keep. But it cannot be me who carries it in, not today, not caught aboard that ship. So I am going to walk out of here, and you are going to let me, and you are not going to follow, because a duke chasing a clerk's girl out of a courtroom is the end of you. I do not care for the estate more than I know you don't. Her voice cracked once, and she mended it. That is why I have to. One of us has to. It is my turn to hold the field by walking off it. She took the tariff book out from under her arm. Her father's book. The worn cover, the pencil in every margin. She had carried it into every room of this fight, and she set it now on the solicitor's table beside the entry, the two of them together. The true hand and the false one, so that whoever was brave enough could match them. "Everything you need is in the margins," she said. "He wrote it all down. He always did. He was a clerk." She looked at Sebastian one last time. "Goodbye, Your Grace." And she walked out of the customs court with her head up and nothing under her arm for the first time in 11 days, into the heaviest fog of the whole grey season, and she did not let herself look back, and behind her the man who had never once looked surprised finally, at last, allowed himself to smile. He should not have. Because Clara had misjudged one thing, and only one, and it was the Duke. She had read every man in every room for 6 years and been right. She had read Thorn right. She had read the Dowager right. She had read the board right. She had read Sebastian Vane as a good man who would spend himself on her, and there she was right too, but she had thought that meant he would spend himself the way she told him to, and stop where she told him to stop. And that was the reading she got wrong. He picked up the book. When the bench returned, and the chairman asked whether His Grace's counsel wished to speak to the entry, the Duke of Aldermere did not send his solicitor. He rose himself, in his fine coat, with Thomas Finch's worn tariff book in his own 2 hands, and the room settled to hear a duke. He opened the book to the 3rd part of the warehousing schedule, where a clerk's pencil had marked it years ago, and he began to read the clause aloud, the re-entry provision, in his good clear gentleman's voice, the goods being re-entered under bond and cleared within the appointed window escape the forfeiture, the seizure being void from the misclassification, and he read it well, and the room listened. And then he stopped. He stopped in the middle of the clause, and he set the book down on the bench, and he looked up at 40 merchants and 3 solicitors and a chairman and Silas Thorn, and he said, "I cannot read the rest of it to you. Not truly, I can say the words. But I have learned this fortnight that saying the words is not reading the law, and there is one person in this city of Bristol who reads it, and the rest of us only pretend. You have all seen her. You laughed at her dress. She was right, and you were wrong, and I will not now stand here and take the credit for a thing she found, dressed in a coat you respect, to spare you the discomfort of learning it from a woman in grey." He turned to the door. "Send for Miss Finch. She is on Prince Street. She is always on Prince Street. And this time, seat her at the counsel's table, where the person who understands the case is meant to sit. You could have heard the fog against the windows. Thorn came off the wall. Your Grace, this is— Sit down, Mr. Thorn, the Duke said, without heat. You have said your piece. Now she will say hers, and then we shall see whose blood runs to forgery. They sent for her. She came in from the fog, with her hair damp and her grey dress darker at the hem, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw the book open on the bench, and the chair pulled out at the counsel's table, and every gentleman in the room turned toward her, and she understood that he had not done as she said, that he had done a far more dangerous thing, that he had staked it all, in the open exactly as the Dowager had warned, and that he had done it not by defending her, which the room would have devoured, but by stepping aside and handing her the floor, which the room did not know how to devour, because it had never had to. He met her eyes across the court. He did not say anything. He only drew the chair out another inch. So she sat down at the counsel's table, the clerk's daughter, in the seat the gentleman kept for the men who understood the case. And she read the law into the record. She read the schedule, and the correct part, and the wrong one under which the cargo had been entered. She took up the original entry, the tampered one, brought now under the court's own seal, and she held it to the high cold window, and showed them the ghost of the true figure under the false, scraped and rewritten, so that even the chairman rose from the bench to tilt the page and see. She read the re-entry provision from her father's book, from the margin where he had underlined it years before any of this, and she matched the dates, the bonded window closing on the 14th day, the re-entry falling clear on the 11th, 3 days inside the law. And then she turned the entry over and showed them the initials in the corner. "You have been told this is my father's hand," she said to the whole room, in the level voice she had learned at a counter. "Thomas Finch. The clerk you turned out 6 years ago for a manifest he swore to his death he never signed. I have carried his book through every room of this affair, and his hand is in every margin of it, and I will show you his hand now, and I will show you this, and you will see with your own eyes that they are not the same." She laid the book beside the entry, the true F with its long tail, the false F, careful, close, and wrong, the T that crossed low in the margin, and the T in the corner that crossed a shade too high, because a forger copies what he sees and cannot copy what he never watched a man do 10,000 times. "A hand made to look like his," she said, "by someone who studied it. Someone who needed a clerk to blame 6 years ago when a cargo was misclassified and seized and bought cheap at auction, and who needed one again this season and reached for the same tool because it had worked once." She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The question was never whether the manifest was forged. It was forged. The question is whose interest it serves to have this cargo seized and sold cheap. Ask that, gentlemen, and then ask who bid a shilling on the pound before the notice was dry, and you will have your forger without any help from me. And every face in the room turned, slow, towards Silas Thorne. He did not run. Men like Thorne do not run. It is beneath the picture they carry of themselves. He stood against the wall with his firm's colours in his coat and his easy manner, and he said, "This is the invention of a clever girl protecting a dead man's name." But the words came out into a room that had already left him, and he heard it, and Clara watched him hear it. Watched the ease go out of his shoulders 1 degree at a time. Watched him understand that the trap he had built twice had, the second time, been sprung on the builder. The chairman ordered the entry examined by 3 solicitors and a portman against the book, then and there, at the board table. They tilted the page to the window. They matched the initials. They found the third part provision exactly where a clerk's pencil had marked it. It took the better part of an hour, and Clara sat the whole hour at the council's table with her hands folded and did not look at the Duke, and felt him not looking at her, and it was the loudest silence of her life. Then the chairman set down the page. He said the seizure was void from the misclassification, the re-entry good, the cargo to be released. He said the entry bore evidence of a hand not the clerk's whose mark it carried, and that the matter of the forgery and of Thorne and Merrow's own goods, and of a bid entered before a notice could lawfully have been known, would go to inquiry that same week. And he said, in the dry way of chairman, that the record of one Thomas Finch, customs clerk, dismissed in the year past on the strength of a manifest now shown to be forged, would be reviewed, and that the court's clerk should note the doubt in the ledger against his name. Struck from the disgrace. In the ledger. Where it had lived for 6 years. Clara heard it, and did not move. She had come into this room 100 times in her mind, and been laughed out of it 100 times, and she had never once let herself imagine this, because you do not survive as a clerk's daughter by imagining this. She sat very still while the fog pressed the windows, and the room she had won at last held. They broke the crown seal on the cargo that afternoon at the quay. She watched it from the cold flags with her coat pulled close. The chests came up out of the hold into the grey light, 14,200 pounds of tea and silk and indigo, the whole season, saved. Thorne stood a little apart with 2 of the inquiry's men already near his elbow, and his firm's goods were being noted for the very schedule he had used against another man. And his face as the seal broke was the face of someone watching a door close that he had always assumed he owned. He did not look at Clara. He would not, now, ever again, and she found she did not need him to. The Dowager Duchess stood at the head of the quay in her fine grey silk and watched her son. Watched the whole port watch her son credit a dockside girl before all of Bristol. She did not rail. She did not weep. She absorbed it the way old houses absorb weather, in one still line, and when at last she spoke it was only to the air beside her, quiet enough that few heard, and Clara, near, did well, said the dowager. She reads better than the solicitors. A pause the length of a whole reckoning. That is not nothing, in a family that trades. It was not surrender, but it was arithmetic, and the dowager was, above all, a woman who could do arithmetic, and Clara understood that she had just been entered, grudging, on the correct side of a ledger that had never had a place for her before. Sebastian came to her along the quay with the cargo moving behind him. He did not have a solicitor with him now. He did not have the book. He had nothing in his hands, which for him was the point. His hands had always done his loving, offering a chair, laying a coat over a sleeping shoulder, drawing out a chair another inch. And now they were empty and open, and that was the whole speech before he said a word. "You disobeyed me," she said. "Comprehensively," he said. "You told me to let the safe path be taken." He stopped in front of her, closer than a duke should stand, and this time there was no footstep to break it, and no board to perform for. Only the grey water and the gulls and the whole port pretending not to watch. I have thought a great deal, these 11 days, about safe paths. My mother laid one out for me. It was well made. Money, a good name mended slowly, a suitable match, a quiet duke in 10 years. He shook his head slowly. I have decided I do not want to be a quiet duke in 10 years. I want to be able to read my own law. And there is one person who can teach me, and she is standing on this quay in a wet grey dress, and I am not going to spend the rest of my life being handed things by clerks I cannot understand. "You cannot marry me," Clara said. "Level, always level. You know what I am." "I know exactly what you are," he said. "You are the only person in Bristol who read the clause. I am not offering out of pity, and I am not offering to be ruined nobly, and I am not kneeling, because a man kneels to rank, and I have had my fill of rank." His voice dropped. "I am asking. That is all I have ever wanted the right to do. To ask you a question, and have it be a real question, with a real answer, and not a duke commanding a clerk. Clara Finch. Will you have me?" The fog was lifting off the water. Behind him the last of the chests came up into the light. She had spent her whole life on the wrong side of every door in this city, the service door, the counting-room gate, the ledger with her father's name in the disgrace column. People like her did not want this, because wanting it was how people like her were broken. She had built that rule herself, out of caring, the same way she had built the trap in the courtroom, and she had just watched a duke walk off the safe path in front of 40 witnesses because a clerk's daughter had taught him that being right and holding the field were two different things, and had then held the field for him when he would not hold it himself. She looked at his empty open hands. "Sebastian," she said. Just that. His name, first, plain, no rank in it, the way he had once let hers slip across a desk over the manifests and not retrieved it. She gave it back to him now on the quay in front of the whole port, and she watched him understand that it was her whole answer, and that she had chosen the word that cost her, because it was the one that was true. He did not kneel. He kept his word. He only took her ungloved hand in his ungloved hand, over no ledger this time, with nothing between them at all, and held it, and that was the loving done, in the open, on the grand staircase of the whole world, instead of the service stair, and the port could make of it what it liked. 6 months on there is a new ledger on Prince Street, though Clara does not keep the chandler's books any longer. She keeps the Aldermere accounts now, the whole season's trade cleared through her reckoning, the schedules read right the first time, so that no cargo of that house ever sits under seal again while men consult a law they cannot read. Her name is at the top of the ledger in her own hand. Not a clerk's daughter, not a book girl. Her name, and the houses, on the same page. The tariff book sits on the desk beside her, rebound now in good dark leather, because the old cover had worn through at last from 11 days of being carried through every room in Bristol. She had it rebound, but she made them keep every page, every margin, every line of her father's pencil exactly where he set it. Thomas Finch, customs clerk, whose name was struck from the disgrace ledger by order of the court, and whose doubt became, that same season, a full clearing when the inquiry ran Thorn to ground. His marginalia is preserved to the last stroke. And after the last of his pages there is a fresh one, blank when the binder finished it, and Clara has begun to write on it now, in her own careful hand, the entries of a new season, so that the book runs on from his life into hers without a break, one long clerk's reckoning, father to daughter, kept honest. Silas Thorne's firm is broken up, and his own goods went to the schedule he built for other men, which is a kind of law too, the plainest kind. She passed him once on the quay in the spring, a diminished man among the very chests he had meant to buy cheap, and she did not gloat, because gloating is for people who were not sure. She only paused, a clerk's daughter in a dress no longer mended because there is no longer any need, and she said the one dry thing there was to say. "You should have read the clause," said Clara Finch, and walked on. The Dowager Duchess sits to dinner in the lit house on the hill now, having recalculated, as she always does, the way tide tables are recalculated, without apology and without sentiment, and she has been heard to remark to her friends that her daughter-in-law reads the customs law better than any 3 solicitors in the city, which in that family is very nearly the same thing as love, and Clara has decided to accept it as such, because she is a practical woman and takes payment in the currency that is offered. There is a table set, there is a house lit against the river dark. There is a man across that table who still cannot read the third part of the warehousing schedule and has stopped pretending he can, and asks her instead, and listens, and that is the whole of it. The smallest hand in the room held the whole law. That is the thing she thinks, sometimes closing the leather book on her own fresh page. Not the loudest, not the finest dressed, not the highest born. The one that had read it. They had judged a grey dress and never thought to ask what was inside the head above the collar, and the answer, all along, had been everything they needed and could not find. If you have ever been weighed by your dress instead of your worth, and set down on the wrong side of the scale, remember the clerk's daughter who read the clause the dukes could not. And tell me, before you go, comment the city you're watching from. I always want to see how far this story has travelled.